Dear viewer, do you enjoy massive DPS, big burst, and easy fluid rotations? Well, this Power Soul Beast build is the build for you. Very similar to my last guide just before Secrets of the Obscure released, the Power Soul Beast is massively big power DPS and will absolutely wreck most content. So for the positives, extremely high DPS. Power Soul Beast at the moment is the second highest power benching class. Maybe next week I'm going to try for the most highest benching class, but I need to learn that class myself better. Secondly, great mobility, massive burst. Soul Beast always the highest power burst out of all classes, with also different bursts for long fights and for shorter phased fights, and great sustained DPS. As I said, second highest benching class at the moment, and such a fun class to play. With all the extra stats that you gain from your pet, you get great survivability and utility in fractals, raids, landscape, and strikes. And for the downsides, obviously we've got some skills that are moving us. That's not great because some players just aren't that confident and might be moving into mechanics that can one-shot them. Second of all, knowing when to swap which pets and such and play kind of a bit more of a different role when you need more CC, those sort of thing. Kind of you need to understand what's required for the fights, and this can affect some of the newer players in a bit of a negative way. Second of all, you have skills that are quite easy to cancel or to not use correctly, like your Axe 5, things like this. Obviously when you use it, you're stuck in place for a couple of seconds, and if the boss moves out of it, i.e. if you have bad fight knowledge, things like this can be a bit of a waste. So just getting used to that, and probably also another thing is knowing how to prepare for your burst window. Soul Beast is an incredibly bursty class with some high burst, obviously great sustained damage, but if you don't preemptively get ready for your burst windows, you could not have as big of a burst, and this could affect your overall DPS quite substantially. So I'm going to try and get to you in the rotation concept how to prepare for your burst windows to make sure you're fully utilizing all of your buffs. Now let's have a look at our gear and stats. Extremely similar to my last guide, the Power Soul Beast is going to be looking at full Berserker's gear, which is nice and easy to get, so yay. Rune of the Scholar, which is fairly easy to get, and then also your relic, you want Relic of Fireworks. The Fireworks relic will equate to the best DPS for this class, which is great because with some classes it's still not performing as intended, so this is good news for us. Obviously we want to try and get as many power infusions as well. Infusions generally are going to help you cap your DPS quite nicely, although they are fairly tough to get. Now, just as the previous guide for weapons, you want sword and axe. This was the old way to play with a longbow just for a bit of burst, and that's fairly good even just when camping this. But now with Secrets of the Obscure, having access to the hammer is a huge DPS increase. So we want a hammer in our offset instead of the longbow. Now for sigils, you want sigils of force and impact. We are going to have a lot of CC, especially because we are trying to proc twice as vicious, which we'll get to in the traits. This is going to be incredibly high for DPS, especially for fractals. Now for food and utilities, you want something like the sweet and spicy butternut squash, or you can get the ascendant variants. Obviously the one with crit lifesteal is the best way to go, or perhaps you like the damage reduction, it's up to you. For utilities, superior sharpening stones, always a decent way to go, and these will help you hit bench quite easily. Now let's have a look at the traits and specializations. They're the same as my previous guide, and I'll go through them. First of all, Beast Mastery, very decent. In column 1, Resounding Timber is a fairly good skill to have because it's just going to give us a little bit of regen and swiftness when we use skills like Sikkim. Now obviously if you are on landscape, you can consider either go for the eyes or potent allies, especially if you are going to detach from your pet. But because we're connected to the pet, Resounding Timber, just a little bit of regen and swiftness, not the worst thing in the world. Now in column 2, we usually go for natural healing, which is basically just slight bit of healing for you every now and then. It almost makes you wonder why we go into half these traits, but you'll see why. If you do on landscape use a great sword, you can obviously look at two-handed training and also whittling strike if you are detached from your beast on landscape. But generally for raiding, as silly as it sounds, these two are usually the traits we go for. And now in column 3, the meta reason why we go into Beast Mastery at all is Honed Axes. you get 120 ferocity as well as an additional 120 while wielding an axe. Now we do use an axe on our offhand, so what this means is we are going to get an extra 240 when we are in this weapon set and 120 with the hammer. As well, we get reduced recharge on axe skills, which is going to be fairly good. This is probably the main reason why to go in. If you are on landscape and you don't really care as much about DPS, you can look at obviously Beastly Warden for taunt on your beast ability as well as Quicken Zephyr. And now for your second specialization, we're going to Skirmishing. Tailwind, basically when swapping weapon, we're getting a bit of swiftness. This will just kind of help you cap swiftness with a few of the other traits that we've taken. In column 1, Sharpened Edges, we have a chance to do some bleed in when we crit, which is basically all the time. So we basically have a 1 in 3 chance on every hit then to basically cause some bleeding, which is just extra DPS. This will obviously help you with your hammer 4 to make sure that you're getting a little bit of extra DPS. But generally it's just, yeah, a little bit of DPS, not the worst thing in the world. Now if for some reason you're hand kiting, obviously you can look at something like Primal Reflexes. The Trapper's expertise is quite interesting if you are going to use something like the Healing Spring. Again, more of a niche scenario for maybe some landscape or maybe some raids, just depending. But to drop Sharpened Edges is just a slight DPS loss. You can obviously go in there if you need to. Now Minor Trait 2 is actually pretty decent, Furious Grip. What this does is it gives us 5 seconds of Fury when swapping weapons, which is generally on a 10-second cooldown. So this is basically going to cover half your Fury time, and that's fairly good because we are getting quite a lot of utility from Fury. Now in column 2, Strider's Strength is the meta way to go. We get a stack of might when we successfully evaded an attack. As well, we get 120 power and an additional 120 power when we are wielding a sword. So as you can see, we're getting some ferocity from the axe and additional ferocity, and we're getting power from the sword and additional power. So the sword axe part of your rotation is getting quite buffed substantially. Obviously, Spotter is not the worst thing in the world if you do require a little bit of extra fury, but you will drop immense amounts of DPS doing this. As well, there is Hidden Barbs, which allows your bleeds to do more damage, but because we don't have any condis, it's not really worth it to go into at all. And your third minor trait, Hunter's Tactics, incredibly important trait, 15% increased damage, as well as 10% crit chance when attacking from the flanks or behind. So you'll notice that obviously our crit will be undercapped, will be at 97.9% crit chance. However, if we do attack from the flanks or behind, we will obviously be well over crit cap. But also, the increase of 15% damage means you always want to be attacking from behind or the flanks. Make sure, especially in Fractals, to try and capitalize on these sorts of things. Don't get caught into the trap of trying to just hit targets face on, because you will drop a fair amount of DPS doing this. And then in column 3 of Skirmishing, there is literally only one way to go, Vicious Quarry. This is an incredibly good skill. Fury grants you 250 ferocity, so i.e. your crit magnitude is huge. It also increases your crit chance to 40%, which is obviously massive. As well, you're gaining fury when you're struck below your 75% threshold. So you kind of can do this if your fury uptime is bad. Maybe eat a mechanic or two to go below it, get yourself some fury, and then just get healed above it. This is kind of a tactic that some advanced players do with their bait attacks to make sure that their boons are always covered. And now into our elite specialization, Soul Beast. Obviously, your first minor trait gives you the ability to bond and have access to stances. This is quite a strong ability. In column 1, Live Fast. Obviously, using your beast ability gives you a bit of fury and a bit of quickness. This is fairly good as it's just basically helping you cap your quickness, but the most important is to try and get that fury so that you can have all those extra boons from it. Now, obviously, if you are on landscape, you can look at Fresh Reinforcements and as well Unstoppable Union. These are for if you basically meld or demeld with your pets. They're just a way of getting some boons or some condi removal. They can be fairly good, but obviously for raiding and for higher tier content, you're never really detaching with your pet by your own choice. Minor Trait 2 is massive, Furious Strength, basically increasing your damage by 15% when you have Fury. This is why when you look at certain traits like Vicious Quarry, you can see under the Fury plus 15% as well as the 250 Ferocity. This trait is basically just increasing your damage, and one of the reasons why you need to make sure your Fury is capped at all times. Now in column 2, Essence of Speed is massive. When gaining Fury, all other boons are increased by 2 seconds. Obviously note there is a 5-second internal cooldown on the skill, but that's fairly good. That basically means, especially if you're having people that produce quickness, in short bursts like a heal brand or a quick brand or something, that you can kind of cap all your boons fairly easily, and this helps you cover Fury, which is your most important boon, other than obviously might and quickness. If you are doing other content and you are struggling with maybe condies ticking you down, you can look at Second Skin, or obviously Predator's Cunning. If you do have sources of poison, for a bit of healing, maybe you take a dagger in your main hand, you can look at these, but these are very niche situational things. Minor trait 3, the most important trait of Twice as Vicious. A lot of our rotation is based around maintaining this. This is a 10-second buff of increased damage as well as condition damage when we crowd control an enemy, which is basically main part of our rotation, is trying to make sure that every 10 seconds we're using a CC ability to maintain this buff. Now in column 3, there are 2 meta choices. There is obviously Oppressive Superiority, basically increasing our DPS by a large substantial portion, as well as the condies we apply. Now this ability you use if the fight is a long fight, i.e. long phases, or the other people in your team suck and you just want to greed DPS, because this ability basically increases your DPS substantially but is a selfish skill. However, there is the choice of Leader of the Pack. What this does is it shares your stance skills with allies around you by 50% of your value, as well as increase your personal value of your stance skills by 120%, so i.e. 20% more. And you share this with 5 targets, i.e. your party. This will increase people's DPS overall if you use skills like One Wolfpack, which we'll get into utilities. This is a good skill to use if there are short bursts on the phases, i.e. the fights are quite short, maybe your 20-30 second burst windows, or if you're a newer player and you would rather have your team do more DPS, i.e. maybe there's someone on your team who's absolutely slapping. This will increase their DPS overall if you use skills like One Wolfpack. You also need to take this skill if you want to share stance skills. So if you want to share certain skills, like perhaps a mower stance to help people cover boons easier, or some of the other skills, perhaps you want to provide some of these skills, you need to use this skill because this is the skill that shares stances with those around you. We'll get into that more in utilities. Now obviously things like Eternal Bond is so that you can switch between pets. This is more for landscape, or perhaps if you're doing some sort of hand kiting or something and you want to move between pets, this is fairly good. But for most cases, you'll either use Leader of the Pack, remember, for short bursts or when you want to share stance skills, or Oppressive Superiority if you're going solo or if you have long bursts on the phase. Now obviously for pets there are so many choices, but the main choice to use is the Red Mower, and if you do want a little bit of extra CC, you can obviously look at the Rock Gazelle. These are the 2 meta pets I would say for this build, and I would basically camp Red Mower. And if I am struggling in my group, perhaps you're in a Samrog or a Gorseville where CC is just a bit of an issue, I would switch over to the Rock Gazelle for just a little bit of extra CC. Now let's have a look at some of those awesome utility skills. First of all, for healing skills, in my opinion, there's only 2 choices. We Healers 1 is the main choice. A massive heal, extending boons, which is huge. We need to cap on all boons. This is an incredibly good skill to use even if you just want to maintain your boons on split phases, i.e. you split on maybe Veil Guardian or Gorseville, you're split in the group for some reason. Using this skill preemptively will just help you cap your boons and help you have good DPS even in burst phases. Remember, it is a command skill, so it is going to provide us with regen as well as swiftness even just when using it with no boons. A nice good skill to have is obviously Healing Spring. Healing Spring is incredibly deceptively good. You place it on the ground, it lasts 10 seconds, and every 2 seconds it removes 2 condies from 5 targets. You can use this one skill to cleanse more than 10 targets if people are moving in and out. Great skill to have on fights like Doom, things like this, where perhaps you might have been split off of the healer, maybe they haven't got their condition cleanse skills ready. Dropping this preemptively for the greater can be quite a massive save. And then the third skill that is fairly good, but it does require quite a bit of coordination, is Bear Stance. Bear Stance, first of all, removes condies and heals you per condition removed, so it makes it stronger than Healing Spring in terms of overall healing. But you need to make sure that if you use this skill, you do have Leader of the Pack to share that stance with 5 targets around you. What this will do is this will share this healing skill with other targets, and if you're stacked well, i.e. you're within the 600 radius required, that will share the skill to obviously cleanse your allies as well. Not as long of a duration, but it's fairly good as well for certain fights, perhaps your Slothazars and things. If you are in bad groups, it won't just remove the condies, it will heal you as well for things like the Shake. Now your two non-negotiable utilities are going to be Sikkim. This basically gives you 25% extra damage as well as movement speed for 10 seconds. This is big part of your burst window and needs to be used at a certain time. We'll get into that in the rotation concept. Remember, it is a command skill, so we are getting regen as swiftness as well when using the skill. It's got a 28-second cooldown, which is quite a funny timing, but with a bit of alacrity, it works out fairly well with our burst window. Your other non-negotiable utility is Signet of the Wild. We just want the veracity. We never use this skill, we leave it on passive, and we just get that extra veracity because we are doing massive power DPS. Do note that if we do activate this ability, we do get a decent amount of immobilize. This can be a last-ditch effort in certain fights like Gorseville, where there's the ad run into the boss, and if it touches the boss, you die. So this can be used in some clutch situations if your group can't handle mechanics, but shouldn't be used. Now the utility that you should leave on is Frost Trap. Frost Trap is a massive DPS. 5 hits of over 4k DPS. Obviously this will go up with Might and Fury and whatever, but this is a massive spike of DPS and we use it in our burst window as much as possible. It is also a combo field of ice, which is fairly good for certain effects, but this is the utility you will switch out if you do need something else. Now, other great utilities to have are obviously your stance skills. Remember, Traiting Leader of the Pack does share these at a lesser duration with allies. Dolyak's stance, incredibly good. This will share the minus incoming damage from condies and normal damage, as well as the 6 stacks of stability, but it will not share the stun break. So just be aware of that when you use this in fights like Slothazar and things like that. Now, an incredibly good utility is Mostot. This could be meta for you in a lot of bad raid and fractal groups. What this ability allows you to do is increases the duration of boons you grant. Now, we don't grant any boons, we're a power DPS class that's just trying to greet numbers. But sharing this skill obviously with Leader of the Pack allows your boon givers to increase their duration. Now obviously they're only going to get like 6 seconds of this, so trying to use this skill just before they give their boon. So you can even time it if you're on Discord or whatever. You can basically tell them, I'm going to cast a skill, smash out your boons then, and they can try cane out as many boons as possible, and it will increase the duration that you give. This is one of the few skills, like the Signet from the Herald obviously, that increases the actual over duration past 100%. So this will allow your boon givers to really cap up their boon time, especially if they are not as good of a player. This obviously gives you a little bit of protection, fury, swiftness, and regen as well, but what's shared is obviously the increase of boon duration. Another fairly good skill is Protect Me. Protect Me basically grants you some barrier, regen, swiftness, because it is a command skill, but this is also a shed stun break for 5 targets. This can be fairly good, especially in certain fights, maybe like your Slothazars. Maybe if you are doing something like Lagos and you're going on the right side and people are bad at jumping, maybe they got high ping, this could be quite a game changer. Now obviously almost all utilities are viable. Obviously things like Guard as well as Search and Rescue can be fairly good for landscape, things like that. Obviously Guard reducing incoming damage for 6 seconds. Search and Rescue, your pet will go and find a down target and go and res it. There's obviously really good skills with Stone Spirit if you need a source of Aegis. Perhaps you are doing your Demoseum or your Kadim 1 things like that, where you do need Aegis to try and block certain mechanics. This could be fairly good. Obviously having Storm Spirit is basically access to a range CC, allowing you to CC from a bit of range, which could be good in certain fights like your Slothazar. Then if you do need extra access to extra CC, Spike Trap is a little bit more CC, although this is a melee range. And for landscape you do have access to the Signets. They basically have a passive which is fairly good, sometimes a bit of toughness, extra movement speed, some healing, things like this, and then an active. Certain good ones like Stone Spirit, obviously being invulnerable to damage is fairly good, and especially if you are looking at something like hand kiting in Deimos, these can be fairly good to use. And now for your elite specializations. We've touched on One Wolf Pack a little bit earlier. One Wolf Pack basically allows you to do a follow-up strike on all your strikes delayed by a quarter second. One wolf pack has a 6-second duration with a 60-second cooldown, which makes it quite long to use. Now, through the trait leader of the pack, we are extending its duration to 7.25 seconds. Notice every strike delay is delayed by a quarter second. This means that we have 7.25 seconds to do some massive DPS, i.e. this is why it's good in short burst phases to use one wolf pack, or if you're not very good at DPS, because we are then sharing it for 3 seconds to our team. This allows all the people in our team to do some massive spike DPS and will help you phase fights and do big damage. However, if the phases do last too long, I would say over 30 seconds per phase, you can look at oppressive superiority. This is more for personal DPS. You will still use one wolf pack then, but it will be for your own personal DPS boost rather than for your allied DPS boost, as well as just a little bit extra on yourself. However, if you do need something like Nature Spirit for a bit of Condi cleanse, as well as Entangle for some Immobilize and Bleed stacks, these are fairly good for niche situations. Obviously, they're not as great as they used to be, but if you do need revives, perhaps you're hand kiting on Deimos or something, having Nature Spirit could be quite clutch if you need to save some teams that go down. Now let's have a look at some of your weapon skills. Notice that your auto attack chain with your sword is massive DPS and also AoE'd up to 3 targets. The first strike is just a normal strike, 3 targets. The second strike has cripple attached to it. This is a soft CC as well as cripple, which is fairly good for trying to manage certain ads. Then notice that your third strike is a 10-second might stack as well, 3 targets and a massive increase in damage. Completing auto attack chains is huge. If you want to hit benchmark on DPS on fights and on the golem, completing auto attack chains is a necessity, especially with that much increase. Skill 2, Pounce, incredible DPS as well, increased by 20% on disabled, defiant or movement impaired foes. Now, first of all bosses are going to be defiant, and your auto attack chain is going to movement impair them, and a few other attacks will. This means you'll generally get this 20% damage increase. As well, you'll gain a bit of vigor, and it's also a combo leap finisher, which means it's going to basically increase its DPS if you are going into certain things like 5 fields and the like. Do notice though that Pounce is going to move you forward. This is another reason why we say things that, you know, obviously Soul Beast moves around, which makes it a bit of a negative. Just be aware when using this ability that the boss isn't going to move into some sort of mechanic that can one-shot you. Skill 3, Serpent Strike, incredible again, massive DPS. In fact, pretty big compared to the other skills, 3.6k without any might. Basically, you're going to leap towards the target. Again, notice that it is moving your position and basically deliver a cripple. But if the target is defiant, disabled or movement impaired, and i.e. bosses will be defiant, it will provide an immobilize instead. This is also going to give you a bit of poison, so if you have traded something like Predator's Cunning for a bit of healing, this will give you a little bit of healing. But most importantly, it's an evade frame and a combo leap finisher. Remember, skills 2 and 3 are moving your position, which make it quite tough, so make sure that you are using these at the correct times. Axe 4, Path of Scars. Big DPS, but not just that, a pull with a Defiance break bar. It's also a projectile finisher, so remember, throwing this through things like 5 field, more DPS. So just be aware of these things. Try position yourself to make sure you're taking advantage of every single combo field on the floor. Notice this is a pull, so if you are CCing or just using it for DPS on a fight like Slothazar, place it past him so you can try pull in a Slublin or something and just help your team deal with ads. And then obviously your biggest hidden skill, Axe 5, Will in Defense. This is a massive 12 hits for over 9.7k without any might even. You're getting the vulnerability stacks, the resolution, as well. This is an AoE up to 5 targets, 5 seconds. It reflects projectiles and it's a combo will finisher. This skill is massive. Notice you are locked in place for that duration. If you move, you will cancel the skill and put it on its 20-second cooldown, which is a big no-no. So try to make sure that when you use the skill, first of all, you've timed it up with all of your burst buffs and everything. And second of all, that you don't have to move so that you can channel this entire ability and get some massive DPS. Just be careful where there are fights that you shouldn't reflect projectiles, maybe your Matthias or maybe things like Karen. make sure that you don't use this skill because it will grief the team. And now for the new weapon, the hammer. First of all, your auto attack chain, big DPS, also a 3 target AoE. Notice how it builds up from 1k to 1.3 to 1.8, and the last hit is a 5 target hit, so it is fairly large. Make sure to finish auto attack chains when you can do it. Now the trick with the hammer and with Secrets of the Obscure in general is we can't obviously determine whether we will be unleashed or normal. So you can select whether you want the skills unleashed or normal, and this can affect your gameplay drastically. So for skill 2, you want unleashed wild swing. This is bigger DPS as well as an increase in DPS on disabled or defiant enemies. Now notice, bosses will be defiant, so we will always get this 20% increase, and it is a 5 target AoE hit. So this target is going to do way over 2.6k because of the damage increase. Now obviously if you are struggling with survivability, perhaps on landscape, using the normal wild swing for the barrier is not a bad idea. You can consider this. Now with skill 3, overbearing smash and unleashed overbearing smash, obviously the unleashed version is more DPS. It has a blind as well attached and removes boons from a target. So if you are struggling on landscape and things, this is the way to go. But for meta DPS, we're going to use the basic overbearing smash because we want the daze, the barrier is fairly good, and the damage loss between overbearing and unleashed overbearing is not that much. So we are going to use this skill to try and maintain our twice as vicious, which is fairly good. For skill 4, Savage Shock, we'll obviously go for the Unleashed Savage Shockwave. So for the basic version, obviously we're going to get a bit of protection. There's going to be some weakness, vulnerability. So obviously, again, if you're on landscape and you need these things, you want the emobes, things like this, you want the protection, you can consider it. But for benchmark DPS, Unleashed Savage Shockwave is going to be massive DPS. Firstly, 3 hits, increased by 20% to disabled or defined foes, which obviously is going to be a boss, so we're going to get even more DPS out of it. But notice this, the damage increase per condition is going to skew the benchmark of this class on the golem, because the golem will have every single condi on it, at least one of them, which will inflate the skill a slight bit. That's why it does tend to benchmark quite high. Even though it's the second highest benchmark in power class at this point in time, it is slightly inflated because you probably won't have as many condis on a boss when you're in a raid or a fractal. However, on landscape, you probably will have those condis on because you'll have different people playing power and condi, or perhaps you're in fights in raids, you know, kind of like your Veil Guardians where you'll have condis and power classes. Perhaps it will hit just as hard as it does on the golem, but it could be quite inflated if you are playing pure power builds. But yes, skill 4, Unleash Savage Shockwave, incredibly big, smash in the ground, and an expanding 3-hit radius cycle of a skill, which expands as it hits. This means that if you place this correctly, you will do massive DPS, not just on a boss, but also onto ads. Now for skill 5, Thump. If you do need extra CC, leaving it on basic Thump is fairly good. You're going to get the Defiance bar of 200 as well as a blast finisher. However, the Unleashed Thump is more DPS by quite a substantial margin. As well, you'll get some Might and Fury based on the amount of targets struck, as well as also a blast finisher. So this can help you cap your Fury up and things like this. Just be aware of this when selecting these skills. So generally, you're going to have a normal auto attack chain, Unleashed 2, normal 3, Unleashed 4 and 5. And these skills will help you get benchmark DPS. And as for your beast abilities, F3, obviously worldly impact in the case of Red Mower is your beast ability. So anything that relates to beast in our trait tree will be active from our F3. Massive DPS, you get your Fury, your quickness, as well as a leap finisher. And this is a 5 target. This is quite big for a rotation. Then obviously your F2 skill, massive 5 hits of over 2.6k without any might, as well as vulnerability stacks. Obviously massive DPS. Your F1 skill is just basically an AoE heal, so you can use this if there is breaks in between phases and you just want to heal up your party. Don't forget about it. You know, being in a fractal or a raid group, maybe the healer's off doing a mechanic. Using the F1, especially when there's no DPS to be done, can just help people kind of cap up their health and be ready for the next phase. Now welcome to the rotation concept. Generally this is the hardest part of the guide, because to get ridiculously high numbers, i.e. maybe above 80% of benchmark, you are going to have to get a little bit more scientific and specific. But my goal here is to try help you get towards the 70-80% benchmark idea. So first of all, let's have a look at the opener. For your biggest burst, so i.e. at the start of the fight or in between phases, perhaps there's some downtime or some roleplay, you want to start inside of your hammer rotation, obviously with all of the abilities the way I described to you in the weapon style. What you want to do is throw it on your frost trap, then go into your one wolf pack, and while casting one wolf pack, go into sick him. Please note that frost trap and one wolf pack are quite easily interruptible, so please don't try queue up too many things ahead of time, as they can cancel each other, and putting these on that 4-second cooldown is a massive DPS loss. So you want to make sure that fully channels before casting all of these abilities. Obviously Sikkim won't cast now because I don't have a target, but trying to make sure that they actually go on their proper cooldowns. Now we have 6 seconds from the moment one wolf pack is activated to try get as much big DPS as possible to try and activate that second shot. Now obviously with Sikkim we have more leniency, we have 10 seconds, so as a newer player you want to try and make sure that you get the proper rotation inside of the 10-second mark, but as a more advanced player you have 6 seconds to get the big DPS. Now as soon as you get one wolf pack out and you cast Sikkim inside, as soon as you can see it's gone off, you're going straight into overbearing smash so that you can activate your first round of twice as vicious, this buff here. Then what you want to try do is use skills 4, the Unleashed Savage Shock, and 3, the Unleashed Wild Swings. These are your most important. If you can get a worldly impact in, that is also fairly important and good DPS, but I would say 4 and 2 are the most important. Then immediately you want to switch over. Now inside of your sword axe rotations you want to use skills 2 and 3, and you want to kind of get your 4 out if possible. Generally also we want to save skill 4 for our other side of our twice as vicious. So using skills 4 on the axe rotation and 3 in the hammer rotation, both have a 12-second cooldown, which means they'll be less than 10 seconds with perfect alacrity, which is quite important to maintain that buff. So you want to use skills 2, 3, 4 and immediately go into skill 5. You won't get all the pulses of skill 5 inside of the one wolf pack, even at a really high skill level, but you obviously will get it inside of your Sikkim because you have 10 seconds. Try to get as much of it inside of your one wolf pack. This is the crux of the rotation. If you can get that inside of that, you are going to be doing some massive DPS. As soon as your Axe 5 ends, you can try get out a pounce before your Sikkim goes off. That's quite important. If not, if you are, even a couple of auto attacks aren't the worst thing in the world. Now, if you can time this rotation properly, you'll get a massive DPS spike out. That's kind of the prime DPS spike that you should try get at the start of a fight, and then every single burst window that you can, especially for fights like your Keep Constructs and your Deimos, where there is a mechanic that allows you to do some big burst DPS, i.e. there's a more incoming damage on the boss. This is the pulse, the opener that you want to try get at those points in the fight. Especially remember with fights like Keep Construct, you are going to get some big DPS because of your impact sigils. So you are going to have a good spike regardless, but because of the incoming damage like that and on Deimos when Saul puts it on, obviously not CM, you are going to get a fairly good DPS spike there. Now after your massive opener, remember we have a really good sustained damage. What you want to try and do is you obviously want to continue to line up Sikkim and Frost Trap. Generally they're around a 30-second mark, obviously with alacrity it brings them down by almost equal parts. You want to try combine these two, and then every second rotation you will have one wolf pack ready. So basically you're going to have one without one wolf pack and then your second one always with one wolf pack, and all three of these skills align fairly nice, which makes the rotation quite fluid. Then in terms of your sword axe rotation, skills 2 and 3 are massive DPS and kind of almost needs to be used off of cooldown. Remember, we want to complete every auto attack chain. But inside of our sword axe, we want to use 2, 3. You want to use Path of Scars and obviously your overbearing smash from your hammer rotation to maintain your twice as vicious buff, but obviously using your whirling defense for some massive DPS. This needs to kind of coincide at some point with Sikkim. You need to try coat this entire duration with obviously your Sikkim. And as for your hammer rotation, your main priorities are Unleash Wild Swings and Unleash Savage Shock. Unleash Savage Shock skill 4 is obviously the biggest one, and Unleash Wild Swings I would imagine at your second. Then obviously you can use Thump. Just be careful, this does move you forward, so just be careful about that. really good for capping up your fury and a bit of might. I would try use it at least once. Now obviously because of the timing of the rotation, your Unleash Savage Shock you can only use once in a rotation, because even with perfect alacrity it will take you to around 12 seconds every time, and your weapon swap is 10. Now if you are not such a great player, and I said that in the nicest way, and you see it come off cooldown a second time, use it a second time. Because if you use it as your first ability and for some reason you stay inside of hammer for 12 seconds, which obviously is not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world, use it just before you switch back to your sword axe. You will get some good DPS out of it. Generally your Unleash Wild Swings you can get in 2 in a rotation, your Overbearing Smash you're going to get in once, and your Thump you're going to get in once. And the rest of the time in between that, just make sure you're using auto attack chains and complete every chain if possible. Now generally as well, when it comes to my pet abilities, I would use my F2 inside of my sword axe rotation, because you are going to get a bit more ferocity and a bit more power because of our traits that we've taken inside of Beast Mastery and Skirmishing. So that's kind of going to get you a bit more, as well as Worldly Impact. So I would use these abilities inside of this rotation, and inside of my hammer I would kind of leave them out. But as I said before, if you are like a newer player, using them off of cooldowns is not the worst thing in the world. You obviously want to try and make sure that they align well with your burst window. So basically your burst window, i.e. every second one, you want to delay your One Wolf Pack, Sikkim, and Frost Trap till you kind of see that Unleash Shockwave is ready. You might get to the point where perhaps you do wait that extra 2 seconds. Make sure that you use your One Wolf Pack, Sikkim, Frost Trap for perhaps, if you can, Wild Swings. Switch over immediately, go in here, use a couple of skills, and try and copy the burst that you did for your opener. That can be quite important, because remember, when you use One Wolf Pack and Sikkim, you want to almost have your weapon swap ready. So delaying and extending your hammer rotation by that extra 2 seconds might not be the worst thing in the world, because that will allow you to get to your sword axe. The last thing you want to do is go straight into your hammer, use One Wolf Pack, Sikkim, and you're stuck waiting for your weapon swap timer to time out. So it's quite important to make sure that you've got, at most 3 seconds on your weapon swap when using your One Wolf Pack, because you don't want to be caught inside of one weapon set. And that's it. That's pretty much the whole rotation. Yes, it seems a lot more complicated, but let me just say this to you. If you are a newer player, you can kind of, ignore the hammer part of the rotation. Just do your sword axe. That used to be the rotation, and that will still get you way over 40k DPS, and that's ridiculously good. That's better than most other classes. At their peak, they can't break 40. So being able to break 40 just camping this set is not the worst thing in the world. But obviously, if you add in the hammer part of your rotation, you can be looking at above 44, 45k DPS on the Golem, which is ridiculously high. Like, that is absolute god tier. Your second highest power DPS. Yeah, perhaps maybe at some point they might touch it with some nerfs and such. But like I said before, if that happens, have a look at what's meta. Perhaps the longbow becomes meta again. Maybe keeping the hammer is still good. Even having the ability to have access to all these CC abilities make it a ridiculously good build to use. And as well, the auto attack on the hammer itself is so strong, and the access to boons. This build I don't really see getting nerfed at all, or if it does, not by a significant margin to take it out of, I would say, the top 5 highest power DPS classes. Bringing this into Fractals will absolutely dominate, and yeah, I can't recommend this build highly enough. I enjoy Soul Beast a lot, and I think that this build is great. If you compare your HP at 18k to something which is the highest, like the Power Catalyst at like 11k, you've literally got almost double the HP. Absorbing your pet also gives you so many extra stats, including a little bit of toughness and things like that, which is more survivability. So your survivability of this build compared to, the absolute glass cannon of Power Catalyst makes this build, in my opinion, the better power DPS build, especially for newer players. But if you do get into that higher tier, you can obviously have a look at the Catalyst. Now, I'm going to base whether I make the Catalyst next week based on CMC's nerfs and see if it's going to be nerfed. And if it's not, I'm going to make that my next video, hopefully. I'm still learning it myself a bit, so I want to give myself a bit more time to absolutely perfect it. But again, if you've enjoyed watching this video, please like and subscribe. And if you haven't enjoyed it, I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.